So if you're feeling like, man, it's hard for me to make the right choices, you have to think about like, it's not just your willpower. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Talks, the podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. I'm Courtney. This is my brother, Paris. Paris, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. I'm kind of fighting something a little bit. You might hear my voice a bit, so apologize in advance. But other than that, I don't know. I had a great workout with Coach Steve this morning,
Nice.
and crushed some client check-ins as well this morning. The team is doing really well. So you know what? It always fires me up and lifts my spirits even amongst battling something. My immune system's off to war right now, I think.
Off to war, yeah. Well, you're battling your immune system. There's a lot of people battling fat loss goals out there.
That is
how was
true.
that for a
What
segue?
a segue.
Was that
Yeah,
an okay
not
segue?
bad.
How'd I do? Yeah, there's a lot of people battling fat loss goals out there. So today we're going to talk about, why does fat loss actually feel so hard? Because I think if it were easy, one, we wouldn't hear so much about it. Two, we'd have a really shredded population. To put it the other way, we'd have a very lean population, or we'd have less of a problem socially as a society with obesity in North America.
That is very true. And
Right?
we probably wouldn't have as much of a thriving business, to be completely honest. if
That's
it was
true,
so
too.
easy.
If it was so easy, yeah, if everyone could just snap their fingers and have it happen, right? So we're here today not to shame anybody for the challenge of not finding success with fat loss, but to provide just a sense of understanding. It's like fat loss is hard for a lot of very valid reasons. And today what we're going to do is unpack those reasons, because one thing that I strongly believe is when you know why something happens, you can tackle it, right? You can start to strategize around it. So this is actually going to be the first of a two-part episode sequence. Today, we're going to say, why does fat loss feel so hard? And then in next week's episode, we're actually going to talk about how can you make it easier, specifically by how can you make a calorie deficit easier? Spoiler alert, we're talking about calorie deficits when we talk about fat loss. So that's the game plan for this episode and next week. So if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss next week's as the follow-up. So today's going to just be focused on like understanding why it's so hard. And then we're going to focus next on how we can make it easier.
Perfect. I like it. Let's do this.
So when you talk to most new clients or you're talking to prospective clients, I think we hear it a lot. Like, I've been trying forever. It's just hard. I can't get started. What would you say is like the first thing that makes it so challenging? Let's start as a society, even like why is it so hard?
Well, a lot of different reasons, right? This is such a multifactorial thing that we're talking about here, especially if we talk about obesity. It's such a multifactorial issue. And that's why, we can't just say, oh, it's this, it's that. No, it's not. It's like a variety of factors. But I think one of the main things to actually kick things off here is just confusion. Like, people kind of know I should be eating less and moving more type thing, but they're just really confused because they might have heard, oh, fruits are bad for you, or oh, you should do keto, or you should do intermittent fasting, or oh, you have to do cardio, or oh, you should do HIIT classes. And then people are like, well, I'm getting a bunch of different messages here, like which one is actually right? And I'm just absolutely confused. And then when you're overly confused and overwhelmed, you just don't do anything, and then you're like, well, screw it.
To me, that's the number one thing. It's mixed messaging, because we're going to talk about practical reasons why it's hard to put in practice the things to achieve fat loss. But if you don't even know what to put into practice, it's way harder, because every day there's a new narrative. Every day somebody's telling you do something or don't do something. And then what ends up happening is like nobody has any direction. So the mixed messaging is a huge part of it, because what that translates into is lack of direction and lack of a plan. I would say fat loss is really hard because if you don't have a plan on how to tackle it, then you don't even know, how am I even measuring success? What am I supposed to look out for? Or, what is the thing that's actually going to contribute so that if there's a lot going on, I can prioritize that one thing, right? So the mixed messaging, I think, is a huge, huge, huge part.
Yeah. That's a really big one. And that's why, one of the reasons why we made this podcast. So we can give some clarity for people so they actually know what matters. And then once you figure that out, you're like, wow, it's actually a lot simpler than I thought. That's what we hope. So
that's the goal, at least to help reduce the friction of all the mixed messaging, right? And start to build a plan. But I want to dig into why the mixed messaging is actually such a problem. And I'm going to put it out there in two ways. Okay. The mixed messaging on fat loss and the confusion that comes with it is really just rooted in the fact that, generally speaking, as a general population, we do not have enough of an understanding of the nutritional principles behind fat loss, and we don't have the opportunity to really develop the skills in the way that maybe we should. So I think about like high school education, post-secondary education, things like that. There's no real learning opportunities unless you actually specialize in nutrition or even maybe in some kin programs like yours. Like, you don't actually have the opportunity to learn. This is the scientific, academic theory, principles, the basics of nutrition. You actually have to go out of your way to seek that.
Yeah, it's very true. And you won't even know where to go to find that unless you're like, into this stuff like we are. Like when I was younger, I always say I was super privileged to find some good resources at a very young age, but I was also studying that in school. So I kind of knew where to look and had good influences of a couple coaches as well that could steer me in the right direction. But I feel like if you don't have that, and just if you're just in the general population, like you will not learn it in school. And the most shocking thing ever that, I'm sorry to say this, is that even your medical professionals have no idea about practical nutrition, which everybody's listening like, oh, there's no way my doctor doesn't know. No, they really don't. And I am shocked what I hear from people's doctors in terms of the lack of actual education around practical nutrition. It's crazy. So like if you don't have it from your medical professional and who's supposed to be guiding you on your health, and then you don't have it from your education as a kid and growing up, and you don't know where to look, then what the heck are we going to do?
You have no other options. I actually had it's interesting you brought up the medical professionals, because I remember having a call with a client once and she was like, Courtney, I'm in shock. And I was like, what happened? She's like, I went to my doctor's office yesterday and I told them, I'm following macronutrient based plan for, she said the word diet, but like that's her eating plan. She follows macros and does all that. And the doctor didn't know what she was talking about. She asked her, she's like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, Courtney, I think I have to change my doctor. I was like, that's wild. Did not comment on her relationship with her doctor, but I was like, that's actually crazy. And a good recognition for those of us who live and breathe this stuff every day, that it's not commonplace, even where we expect it to be commonplace.
Or we would hope it to be.
Or where we'd hope it would be. And, not to knock GPs, like, or any doctors, like they have their fields of expertise, but nutrition is not one of them. And the amount of nutrition content that's actually in, med school curriculum is bare minimum. And especially not oriented specifically around now when we're talking about fat loss principles. That's different than basic, like, okay, here are your fat soluble vitamins and your water soluble vitamins.
Yeah. No, we're talking about like practical, what can I apply in real life to change my body composition, build muscle, lose fat? Like there's a very lack of understanding around those basics, which is shocking, but it is what it is. And you guys might be thinking like, oh, well, you guys aren't, physicians. Well, how can you say this? Well, my previous job, I used to talk to physicians all day. Like that was literally my job, was to talk to physicians. Okay.
Yeah. As a pharmaceutical sales rep.
Yeah. In the pharmaceutical industry. And also like, I do have a pretty big education surrounding, physiology and all these things. So it's not like I'm just coming out of here having not studied it and being like, well, the people that studied it don't know anything. That's not what we're saying. But you guys would be surprised, what we've heard from clients in terms of what their doctor says. But anyways, we can move on in terms of why that. But what that is one of the main reasons. So we had to point out why people are confused.
It is, because I think if we go back to the number one reason we said is like confusion and mixed messaging, and that comes, I think we immediately think about social media, but it also comes from other areas of our lives, such as, different relationships with healthcare professionals or different education backgrounds or lack of educational backgrounds. And now when we take that real life example of people with different or lack of education on it, and then you throw those people on social media where anybody can say anything on social media.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people on social media who are like, Dr. So-and-so, but they're to get a doctor, you either have a PhD, you're not just an MD, right? So anybody who has a doctorate is a doctor, and they can be in a field that's completely unrelated to nutrition. And yet they start talking about nutrition. You're like, what the heck are you even saying? Right. And I'm not going to name drop, but we've seen quite a few out there recently. And so now all of a sudden those mixed messages have this like false sense of credibility behind them. Mm-hmm. And all that does is lead to more confusion.
Letters, because of the two letters in the front of the name. Yeah. Exactly. So that's like key thing. I think we hit that home enough. And again, we're not knocking anybody, but if you got to know what you're talking about, if you're going to put information out to millions of people, that's the main thing. I think So that's like one of the main reasons why people are confused. And then again, social media, as we said, wild, wild west with people that don't know much and maybe just look good and then tossing out, information. Then because they look good, people will believe them if they don't know better, right? Like how many times have we seen somebody with a six pack that maybe just be genetically, gifted or on a lot of, performance enhancing drugs, and then just makes this wild claim about nutrition that's so false. And then everybody's like thinking that's correct. Like it happens every day. So, anyways, yeah. So people are confused. Number one reason.
Yeah. And because people are confused, I think they also don't necessarily have the opportunity to build the right skills, right? Because I like to say fat loss is not a thing you do. Fat loss is a skill you have. To be able to lose fat means you're going to navigate all of the things in your life that you need to do to align to a consistent calorie deficit over time, right? And when we're talking about fat loss, we're also talking about muscle maintenance, which is a separate conversation. But for you to align all those things in your life to support a calorie deficit, it's a skill to do that. Yep. And I think a lot of people think that fat loss is just, I just do this thing and I lose fat. No. You have to develop the skills to know how to do the thing properly. So once let's say we clarify all that misinformation and we're like, we know exactly what the principles are. We need a calorie deficit. We need to manage our nutrition. We need to be hopefully lifting or strength training so we're preserving muscle along the way. Once you know these are the things that actually matter, you've filtered through that noise, then you have to say, well, how do I do that for me? How do I put that into practice for me? And that's a skill. And skills development, I'm going to go on a rant here. Skills development takes time. And most people are too impatient or too shiny object syndrome to put the time into developing those skills. To know something is one thing. To figure out how to do it for yourself is a whole other, and you have to be patient. And the reason why it's so hard is because too many people get impatient. And again, I'm not knocking people for that impatience. I'm the queen of impatience. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have to know that to build the skills, you're setting yourself up for success, and you have to be willing to invest in skills development. I'm such a firm believer of that.
Oh, 100%. It is definitely a skill, and it's one that you get better and better at over time, just like any skill. But here's the way you can frame it as, oh, I'm impatient. I just want, a quick fix. But then once you've done 7 quick fixes, you could have built the skill set 3 times over by the time you've done the 7 quick fixes. So actually in the long run, it does save you time and headaches and all these things, obviously. And you actually make progress versus spinning your wheels or yo-yo dieting. But I think, the way to phrase it, and I always use the instrument example, is you only have to learn to play piano once. And as long as, you touch the keys every once in a while, you keep those skills. You don't just all of a sudden forget one day to next. Yeah. So same thing with fat loss, you know how to do it. And, you only need to learn it once, the skills and the right knowledge, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you also sharpen those skills though over time, right? Because, when you're on a longer weight loss journey, obviously you have you lose a lot of weight and you need to maintain that. But I think you also for those of us like me and you, who we're kind of on this continuous journey where we're okay, we want to put on muscle, we might lose some fat, go through fat loss phases. And every single time we do that phase again, we sharpen those skills, right?
100%.
So it's not it's
every single time. Yeah.
It gets easier. I think about the ideal craftsman, right? They have their toolbox, but they might upgrade their tools over time. And that old wrench that they have still is always going to be important and still does the job, but they might now have new tools in the toolbox that just strengthen their ability to do that more easily over time, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that is the core main challenge that makes fat loss so hard. Lots of misinformation, which gets in the way of people actually knowing where to focus. And then once they learn, okay, this is what I need to do, putting into practice maybe needs the skills development, which we don't always make time for as a society. Yeah. So that really is a huge challenge, because without the right information on your side and the ability to use that information, nothing gets done. Nothing productive gets done, let's say. You might spend a lot of time doing things, but it might not actually lead you to your goals. So things feel harder because there's a lot of friction around, I don't know what to do. And when I know what I have to do, I don't know how to do it. So that is the core of why it feels so hard. However, even when you know what to do and you recognize I need to build skills, it's still not the easiest thing in the world, right? And there are a lot of practical, let's call it challenges to overcome in order to successfully lose fat that still take a lot of effort and thinking, even once we've corrected the challenge of information, mixed messaging, and skills development. So let's talk about those things for a little bit. What are those practical things that can actually sort of make it actually feel hard.
Yeah, and again, fat loss feels quote unquote hard or less hard for different people, right? And also, let's just call a spade a spade. Like it's not the same for everybody. It is harder for some people to lose body fat than others, but everybody can lose body fat. But like I always say there's standard deviations away on both sides for any
Absolutely.
thing that we're talking about. Fat loss included. Some people do get lean relatively easy compared to others, but that doesn't mean that we don't try or that we can't still be successful. Okay, so let me just paint that first things first.
Yeah.
But I think a lot
And
of times,
actually,
yeah,
can I caveat on your really, really, really
yeah,
important caveat? Because I think we need to give that a lot of weight. We're not here to say, oh, let's just make it easier. That's it, right? Like we want to recognize the challenges, but we also know that this conversation is not going to be able to accurately capture all of the challenges that every individual faces because it is so personal and so nuanced. So we are speaking with, some broad brushes here,
yes,
because
yes,
these are broad brushes, themes that we've seen from working with so many clients who have fat loss goals, from talking to people about the concept of fat loss, from what shows up in our feeds and all that sort of stuff, from our experience, both pursuing, educational materials and education in these fields. We are very aware that this conversation is generalized. We're here to touch on main themes, and it is going to be very, very different for each person. And as you said up front, Paris, we are not here to take away from the fact that fat loss is hard. We're here to shed a light on why it's hard. Fat loss can be hard. Yes, because some people it is easier, right? So,
yeah.
But
and sometimes when people thought it was hard, but then they know what to do, then it becomes easy. So we're talking about when fat loss can be hard, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, like we just said, like when you develop the skills, like it gets a lot easier.
Yeah.
That's intentional. It's just like, why is the general topic so daunting and hard?
Yes. Yeah. So I think the next thing we have to talk about is environment. Okay. And there's like a different ways that we can think about this, but we talked about, okay, let's say you got the right information and you built the skills. Something that could be potentially creating friction with your goals for fat loss is your environment. And this constitutes not only your at-home environment, like for example, if your whole family eats KFC and ice cream every single day and all they have out is these options, like that would make it a little bit more difficult versus, they have a bunch of high protein options, good nutrient dense foods, all those types of things. Like, but it doesn't just involve your home environment. I'm also talking about like your work environment, like, and who you're surrounded by, your friend group. What do they do? Are they like binge drinking 4 times a week and then going out for poutine after? Or, if you're not Canadian, you don't know what poutine is, going out for, I don't know, burgers and whatever and pizza? Or, are they into living a similar lifestyle to you? And, so environment constitutes a lot of things. And also not even just those environments, but also just where you live and, what kind of things you're exposed to, even when you leave the house, driving around, when you travel. Like environment is so kind of comprehensive.
Everything. Well, even I'm going to go one step further and say, let's talk about the macro environment we live in. It's only in recent history that humans have had such an abundance of access to high calorie dense food. It's promoted to us, it's convenient, it's more affordable sometimes than other options. So we talk about the world we live in, especially North America, the abundance of food around us, and also higher calorie density food, it is just there. So if you're feeling like, man, it's hard for me to make the right choices, you have to think about, like, it's not just your willpower. I think people, feel a sense of shame. It's like, oh, I just don't have the willpower. It's like, no, your environment is also set up in a way that does make it challenging for you to make the decisions you might want to make.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some environmental things are out of our control, but some are in our control. Like if I even look now, why it's so easy for me to stick to my goals is like, first things first, like my family knows what's up. They know I want to, be dialed in on my variables. Like, my sister also works with me in a fitness business. My partner understands what I'm doing. All my friend group's all in great shape. So like those things make it a little bit easier for me also, but also I do set up like my home environment, right? Like with the food I need and those kind of things, and making sure, my bed is ready for me to have a good night's sleep. Like all those kind of things that are going to make it easier for me to reach my goals. I can set that up, but I think, so some things are in our control with environment and some things aren't. But a lot more things might be in your control than you think. Yeah.
I think it's worth actually just doing a pause and saying like, okay, so if I were to audit my environment, that's everything from where I work, my home space, the people I'm surrounded by, the world around me, all that. And you say, okay, what's not easy for me to control, what's outside of my control. And like, you can't control, what your partner does, but you can control what kind of conversation you have with them. Or, you might not necessarily be able to control what snacks are at work, at the work snack counter, but you can control what snacks you pack to take to work, right? Do an audit and figure out what is within your control, because instead of worrying about everything else being harder, figure out what can I do to make things easier when it comes to my environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Okay.
Amazing. So environment is definitely like a huge thing. And I think that's just scratching the surface of it, but hopefully that's check in that column of like environment definitely can make fat loss feel harder. The other thing too, I think people might be wondering is like, fat loss is a physiological goal, right? Like we want to change our bodies. It's a physiology that's changing. Are there physiological challenges that can make fat loss feel harder?
As I said, like for some people, like they just tend to have an easier time with fat loss than others. Like, so that usually comes down to physiology. And, I think a lot of people at rest just might burn more or less calories, which means it's, technically, like, let's say my maintenance calories were 4,000 calories. Okay. That would actually be too much. That would be the opposite problem. But let's say to maintain my body weight, I have to eat 4,000 calories. You know how easy it would be for me to be in a calorie deficit? Like super easy.
Yeah.
Right. In fact,
you can still choose high calorie foods. You can still eat a lot of food. You can have a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I wouldn't have to think about anything. I'd probably just be super lean by accident, pretty much, like to the point where I'd have to try to not be so lean. But if somebody, on the other end of the spectrum, let's say somebody maintains weight on like 1,500 calories, which, some women might. And obviously you can modify these things over time and et cetera, with habits and muscle mass and blah, blah, blah. We won't get into, but as a hypothetical example, you have to be pretty on point if you're going to then create a calorie deficit eating 12 1,100 calories, and you might be like, there's no way people have to go that low. Well, people do. And that's why I hate when people say, oh, you shouldn't be eating 1,700 calories. Like, most women to lose weight need to like, I would say on average between the range of like 1,000 to like 1,600 calories on average, like for most women. So anyways.
No, I just want to piggyback off that because there's a very real example here within it. When we're talking about losing fat, right, for our or weight loss, for our purposes, let's just say weight loss in this context, you need to be in a calorie deficit, which depends on its relationship to your maintenance calories. That's what you're talking about. Okay, so maintenance calories, in terms of the amount of calories you expend in a day, are based primarily on your age, your gender, your weight, body weight, to a certain extent, like, height and weight together. So your just general stature as a human. And then also, other things that you talked about, like your percentage of muscle mass, and your activity levels, right? So if you are, let's say you are a very petite woman who works a sedentary job. Okay. So you're small in stature. That's automatically going to mean that your maintenance calories are low. Sedentary job, you don't naturally have a super high expenditure. Okay, you're not now adding more calorie expenditure to your day. So for you to now put yourself in a calorie deficit, and if we were going to say like a 500 calorie deficit, let's say, that can get quite low. And so that person is going to have a much harder time. And I want to shout out our client Taz, because Taz sent me a reel she saw from another fitness creator. And it was like, oh, petite women, nobody's telling you these things about fat loss, and that's why it's so hard. And she sent it to me and she's like, Court, what are your thoughts? And I was like, well, first of all, I hate how she's positioned this, because it was very fear-mongering, like their world is holding back this massive secret for petite women. But the post did have some validity in that she did say, we need to diet on lower calories, and here's the impact of that, right? Yep, and I think it's just, that is true. So the reason why it can feel harder is because if your baseline calories, maintenance calories are lower, your deficit has to be lower. Now, like you said, if you're talking about somewhere between 1,200 and 1,600 calories, you have to be way more precise with your daily intake. Your food selection has to be much more intentional. You might have less flexibility, right? Less flexibility. Any sort of variance from meals out or meals that you're not preparing at home now has a bigger impact. Yeah. Females have a hard time. Harder time. Potentially have a hard can potentially have a harder time just because their fat loss calories have to be lower.
Yeah, for some. We've also had some small women who can diet on high calories. So again, there's individual variation, but on average, generally speaking, we can paint that broad strokes here. So okay, this is some good stuff here. And so yeah, anyways, there's definitely genetic differences with like, how many
Yes.
calories you need to
Yeah.
beat to lose fat. Something. Okay.
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to talk about now. I do not want to have a big conversation on genetics, but I just want to allude to the fact that genetics can also play a role in things like appetite,
Yes.
food focus, food noise, the amount of time like that you think about food, hunger regulation. Genetics can actually play a role when it comes to some of the things that motivate us towards food, right? So we talk a lot about this concept of like food noise, how much we think about food, our appetite signals, the amount we like crave food. Some of that does have a bit of a genetic component, right? So that can also sometimes make it harder. If you're telling me, okay, you got to eat fewer calories and all I'm doing is thinking about food, that's going to make it harder, right? So I don't want to go deep into the genetics debate there, but I just wanted to put a note on.
Yeah. And like, guys, each of these topics we're talking about could be a whole podcast episode, but we're just kind of giving you some things to think about. As Courtney said, painting in broad strokes here. Okay. So let's just do like a summary of what we talked so far before we kind of wrap things up here.
Yeah. So we started off by saying fat loss can feel really difficult because there's a lot of mixed messaging. So before we even talk about how are we going to lose fat, it's like what actually matters for fat loss is really confusing. And so that makes it very hard to start to put into action the principles you need for fat loss success, right? So if you don't really know what matters, it's hard to formulate a plan. Now, once you actually figure that out and you have a plan, the next thing that makes it more complicated is, all right, well, how do I put this plan into practice? So I understand a calorie deficit. I understand that this is how I need to, lose fat, but I don't know how to do that for myself. So the lack of skill building can also make it challenging. If you are new to this or you haven't invested the time in building the skills, then fat loss can feel more difficult because you don't have the action plan. Now, even when you've got the knowledge, you've set up the plan, you've built the skills, there are certain variables that can still make it feel difficult to actually adhere to a calorie deficit that you need to be successful. And that can be the role of your environment, that can be your individual physiology, that can even be slightly genetics and how often you think about food, right? So those things do definitely have an impact. And all of them are like huge, massive, bigger conversations. Today, we just want to be like, did we check off our list of some of the things that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah. And this is not an exhaustive list, but this is some of the main contributors to why fat loss can potentially feel difficult for some people in certain situations.
Yes, exactly. For more conversation on some related topics, definitely want to steer people towards our episode on how can you manage hunger while dieting, because we haven't even talked about like hunger yet today and the fact that, some people feel hungrier when they're in a fat loss phase than other people do. And obviously if you're hungry, everything feels harder. So just going to say for that topic, go explore that episode.
Yeah.
And then also, if going back to this idea of sometimes people don't know what actually matters, which is kind of the first challenge we had, definitely also encourage people to tune into our episode, Can You Lose Fat from Exercise Alone? Because I think one of the biggest things that makes fat loss feel harder is when you're kind of focused on somewhat of the wrong thing. And if you're focusing just on exercise for fat loss success instead of nutrition, then that definitely can make it feel harder. And we unpacked that in detail on that episode as well. So we'll link those two both in the description below, because I think we've each done separate topics on that. So that's why we're not talking about those here today, just for context.
Awesome. Well done.
All right. Shall we wrap it up?
Let's do it.
Before we get carried away and this streamlined episode becomes like 15 different discussions on each of these different subtopics. But all right, Paris. So our question today was, why does fat loss feel so hard? How do you feel about how we've covered that and answered it today?
I think pretty good if we're just kind of giving people the general things to think about and, what we've seen, in our lives and in our clients' lives. And I think this is a good place to start, having some, I get it now, moments when it comes to why fat loss can potentially feel so hard. But I think a lot of the other episodes we've done touch more on these individual things in a little bit more detail. So definitely check those out, as Courtney said. But yeah, a lot of you guys, if you're not subscribed though, you got to make sure you're subscribed. Okay. I don't know what percentage of listeners aren't subscribed, but I will be so happy, and Courtney will have a big smile on her face if we have the subscriber count going up. So we gotta be doing more call to actions to press that subscribe button. It means a lot to us, and there's a lot of more free information coming, guys. So yeah.
including next week's, which is a natural tie into this one, which is going to be how can we make a calorie deficit feel easier? So we're going to start to talk more about like some of those specific practical things that we just alluded to. Like once you've figured out, okay, this is the principles, I've got the skills, now we can start to put it into practice. So that'll be next week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss that one.
Awesome. And we'll see you there.
All right. We'll see you there. Have a great week, everyone. Without further ado, we'll be back in your feeds with another episode of Truth Talks next Monday. In the meantime, have a great week. Bye for now.